stick with our pyramid. But if give you a little taste. Hello, and I'm doing this next series of videos pretty much by popular demand. I want to give you guys a repertoire for the lazy people. If Homer Simpson was a chess player, he would love this series of videos. I'm going to show you an opening which you can play with the white pieces, which is dynamic, exciting, but very easy to learn. An opening where you don't have to know a lot of theory. It's really a lazy opening. So it's perfect for us players who don't want to read every latest article on our beloved opening. We can play this in a simple yet effective way. What is the opening? It is the London system. And in this opening, we have a setup. It's an opening from the white point of view. And I must point out, I've done a YouTube video on my channel about this, but I'm going to go into more depth here for the subscribers of chess.com and for everyone else. I'm just going to give you a little taster at the start here to what the London system is all about. Now, it really is a great opening from white. It's a simple yet effective plan. Now, to start with in this video, and it's going to be at least a 5-part video series this, I'm just going to introduce you to the setup from white and show you a quick game where it works very well. So I've really come up with a 5-stage rules, 5 rules that I want you to remember at home in order just to get this lazy opening. And then that's really all you need is a little basic starter to learn the London system. So what is rule 1? What is the London system? Well, rule 1 is with the London system, you all start with your queen's pawn. So I'm not going to play any black moves here, you can note. I'm just showing you white's starting setup. So our starting setup is to create this, should we say, that's our front man, that's our front runner. We all start with d4, and next of all, we bring our bishop out to f4. So this is rule 1. Start with a pawn in the center, and then your bishop out to f4, a nice active square. What do we do next? Well, the next thing we can do, and I should point out, the move order sometimes changes with this. You might have to sometimes change around the rules, but it's always the same basic idea. The next thing I want you to do is create a pyramid. So what I mean by that is place 1 pawn on c3 and 1 pawn on e3. And this creates what we could say is a bit of a pyramid structure here with our forerunner at the front of that pyramid. And what this does is it really gives us a very strong and solid setup in the middle of the board, which we can base and attack around. So rule 2, create this pyramid. What is rule 3? Well, we've got to bring our remaining pieces out. And our remaining pieces are our knights and our bishops. So where should these pieces go? Well, this knight normally comes to f3 first. And you can even play this before making your pyramid totally. It depends on the move order that black plays. And then our knight generally comes to d2. So we bring our knights out first. Our bishop, where should our bishop go? It should sit just behind the pyramid on d3, because this is a very aggressive bishop pointing over at black's kingside, and this works especially true when he castles, as we'll see very shortly. So this is rule 3. And what's rule 4 and 5? Well, rule 4 often is knight to e5. This is a very good starting attack. And rule 5 is a flexible rule, which we must come on to later. So actually, I'm really calling this really only four rules. Rule 5 could be h4, depending on the situation, or e4. But as the videos go on, we'll see a bit more about that. But let's just stick to those 4 rules for now. So that's really all you need to know the basic setup of this London system. But now for subscribers to chess.com, we'll have a look at this in more depth and look at a beautiful game where white used this setup to destroy his opponent. So I'm going to now bring up this game and we can see exactly, I think, a model game for this setup. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this kind of idea, a little bit, go into some more depth about the moves. And also here, it's going to be a little bit trickier because black's going to be playing moves as well. Always a pity when your opponent plays moves, but it has to happen at times. So let's do this again. Speaking about the rules we know. So d4, this is the head of our pyramid. Knight to f6. And now what's our next move? Bishop to f4. And after this move, well, black has a number of setups, but in the first couple of videos for this series, we're concentrating on setups where black plays d5. And again, you can see there is some flexibility here. Black could have played d5 and move 1, could have played it on move 2. And I'm going to talk a bit more about black's other setups a little bit later. But just to clarify, against this move d5, we're going to stick with our pyramid. But if black doesn't play the move d5 and instead goes for some plan with g6, which is kind of, we should say, an Indian structure, King's Indian structure, even a, should we say, Grunfeld structure. In this type of position, we don't create the full pyramid. This is where we have to change things a little bit, but I won't confuse you there. For the first couple of videos, we're concentrating on the move d5 and these types of positions. Now, I would play e3 here. The actual game in question took a different move order, but it's really not so important. And now c5, and now c3, creating our pyramid. Knight to c6 here. And this is the first little tricky moment actually here. And move order is so important when you're playing chess. Now, at the start, we've done, by the way, rule 1, and we've done rule 2, create our pyramid. Rule 3 is develop our minor pieces. And as always in chess, things change depending what our opponent does. I did say at the start, knight to f3 is the normal move you play. In this position, it's actually a slight mistake. One move you always watch out for in the London system is queen to b6. This is a move which is quite annoying. And if black is getting ready to play this after you've done stage 1 and 2, I always prefer moving my knight to d2 first. Why is this? Well, now if queen to b6, we don't have as many problems down on b2 as he would if the knight was still sleeping. And this common way of meeting queen b6 is with queen b3. Now, don't fall asleep and think, oh, my words, it's an ending. Oh, no, I don't want to do this. Look, when you're playing chess, you have to be willing to take all types of positions on. And this is a very comfortable ending. While I'm doing this video, I've just been watching the World Blitz Championships and Rapid Championships, and it's amazing to see how many London systems being played there. In actual fact, Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, has been playing the London system, this particular variation that we're going to demonstrate in most of his games. So it's going to be a very, I think, attractive opening soon, and it is already. Now, the idea of this queen b3 is that if black ever takes the queens, you get a very nice pawn structure and an open A file. So you're slightly better here. That's all we need from the opening. If black ever pushes on with c4, you've made him push his pawn on. So that pawn is not attacking the top of our pyramid, the d4 square anymore. So here we don't exchange queens. We slip the queen back to c2. And what we want to do next in most positions, let's say after e6, is attack that pawn black's moved with b3. And this is the same idea we just saw. If black takes on b3, we open up the A file and we get a bigger center because we have more pawns in the center of the board. And why is it important in this position to have our knight on d2? Well, the reason is, let's go back. If we went knight to f3 first, let's say instead of knight d2, and now queen b6, queen b3, c4, queen c2. Black has a very frustrating move here. Bishop to f5. And this is offering the bishop, but if we take the bishop, queen takes b2. And the difference here is our knight is on b1, so we can't play rook to b1. And this wouldn't be a problem in our preferred move order. So as you can see, I'm going into some detail, but I want to try to cover you as much as I can here. Anyway, let's go back to the game in question. And the game in question continued a little bit differently. We got our setup, so let's just get around here. And black played e6 and then bishop to e7. Now, there are two ways black normally plays in this kind of position. Okay, I want to move my knight to f3. I just want to make that clear, but it doesn't matter too much. It's the same idea. Black can either move his bishop to e7 or bishop to d6. Now, if he ever blinks his bishop on c8 out first, we should then go queen to b3 because b7 is weak, but no top players play this. Now, after bishop to e7, I think we have a very attractive attacking possibility here. And I don't think bishop to e7 is a very good move. I'm going to show you why now. Bishop to d3. We've created and finished stage 3 now. Now, there's a number of moves that black can play here, but we're following the game in question. Let's say a move like a6. Castles will be similar. What was our next stage? Stage 4. Well, when the bishop's on e7, stage 4 is always knight into e5. This frees our queen up and it gives us great energy in the position. Now, when black castles here, this is the important stage. And this is where you have to be a bit flexible depending on black's setup. Well, black has his bishop on e7. And in this kind of position, I try to avoid castling myself because we want to checkmate black. And there's a very big, massive trick here. My favorite move in this position is pawn to h4. Why? Well, I want to create a pawn storm on this area of the board, but mainly I want to support the g5 square. And this is a deadly idea, very, very nasty idea for black. Black has to be extremely careful in these positions. Now, if he doesn't do anything, we can simply push g4, g5, and etc. attack. And our king is quite safe here because of the pyramid defending it. We don't need to castle. If black takes on e5, we're now going to see the venom behind the pawn on h4. We take with our pawn always. This is a key idea. Remember, always take your pawn. This is another rule to remember. When black takes on e5, take with a pawn. And when the knight retreats, there's a devastating idea here. Can you potentially see a brilliant attacking situation here? The Greek gift. Bishop takes h7 check. And this is why the pawn is on h4. After king takes, queen to h5 check. And after king g8, we have a slow yet very effective idea. Knight to f3. And this knight, even though we're a whole piece down, who said the London system's boring? Not me. Is coming to g5 with a simple idea, queen to h7 checkmate. And this plan would not be possible unless there is a pawn on h4. It wouldn't be possible if we castled. This is why only against bishop e7, I like an early h4 as one of our further stages after we've done the initial one. And here, there's nothing really black can do. And the game in question between Gogolis and Rainer Wentz continued f6, trying to stop the knight coming in. But did it stop it? Oh, no. Knight to g5. It dives into the position anyway. The threat is checkmate, so we give up a second piece, and after black takes it, look at how strong Harry now becomes. Harry, the h-pawn, moves to the Gary file, but double power over here, and the simple threat is g6 and queen h8 checkmate. Black decided the only way to defend against this was to try to give up his bishop, so he played bishop takes g5, so we get one piece back. But after queen c7, f4, white still had this devastating attack on the open file. And the game ended, d4. Well, black has really no development. Look at these pieces sleeping in la-la land. So white got his last piece into the game, the rook on a1, by castling queenside. Pawn takes c3. We're not worried about that. It's only one foot soldier attacking us. That's not going to scare us. Queen h7 check, king f7. A lovely move here from white. Rook h6. Such a beautiful move. It reminds me of a game that Tao played, which you can see in the archive I've done. Queen g6 check is one idea. Pawn takes b2. And now king b1. Black actually resigned here, even though he's a piece up, because he felt helpless to what was going to happen. For example, Let's say he tries c4, trying to go c3, c2. Well, the idea now is queen g6 check, only one square for the king. And now the last white piece comes to h1, and there's a threat of rook h8, checkmate. So very devastating stuff. So it's really a little introduction to the London system here. Let me just run through it one more time for you. So we're going to go d4. Now against d5, this is what we're doing our first 3 videos on. We're going to go bishop f4. We don't develop this knight quite yet. And now, well, there's a couple of move orders black can play. Black normally brings his knight out, but if he plays a move like c5, we can just create our pyramid here straight away because we want to support that square. So you've got to be wary of the move order. But when he brings the knight out, I would finish the pyramid first. This is my preferred order. And when the knight comes here, remember, if you're not careful here, there's a queen b6 move. But if we go knight d2 first, queen b6 is not as worrying because queen b3, c4, queen c2. The idea is to go b3, undermining that pawn structure. And if bishop f5, we can simply take it because our rook is not in danger anymore. And what black generally does, and what this video is dealing with, we'll come to other options later on, is e6. And now he's gone e6. As a general rule, as soon as he plays e6, we can bring our knight out to f3. Why? Because we don't have to worry about bishop f5 anymore. So another rule there, once e6 has played knight to f3. And after this, we're concentrating here on bishop to e7, most popular move at club level. Now we finish our development with bishop to d3. This is stage 3. And let's say black castles. What's the next stage with bishop to e7? Well, our knight flies into the center. And in this type of position, if black ever captures the knight, we always take with our pawn. And here we can't do the Greek gift quite yet because we haven't got our pawn on h4. So in this kind of position, I'd recommend h4. And now black has to be extremely careful. If he plays a move like c4, bishop takes h7 will lead to this attack we just saw. So that's my first introduction to the London system. I know it's quite a lot to take in, but hopefully this whole series will give you a very good overview and everything you need to know for the London system to be an effective yet deadly opening for you. Welcome to my second video on the London system, and this was a game between 2 big hitters of America. We have Gatakamsky with the white pieces and Samuel Shankland with the black pieces, and it involved a very nice trick in the London system. And let's just dive straight into where that trick takes place, and that's already on move 9. And I'm just going to go through the captures very quickly here and see if anyone watching this quick clip can find an amazing move for white in this position. A position that actually looks quite passive. It doesn't look like white has any active pieces here, but there's a devastating move, which we'll look at in more detail later on. Can you see the move? The move is bishop takes h7 check, and this is what Kamsky played in the game. Another version of what we call the Greek gift sacrifice. Black really has to take this bishop, and now both the white queen and the white knight come flying into the game. Queen h5 check, only one move for black, and the point of this opening, knight to e4. The knight attacks the queen, but very importantly, the pawn is pinned because of our queen on h5. Just look at how all the white pieces just flown into the game. Fly, my babies, fly. And after the queen moves, the white knight finishes its journey on g5 with a devastating threat of queen h7 check. So this video is really going to look at how really the granddaddy or the hero of the London system, Gatakamsky, a player who's been playing it all his life, has got to this position. And we're going to look at other ideas and the current theory in what is probably the critical line of the London system at the moment. So we're now going to move over to that for chess.com subscribers and have a look at this in more depth. So let's go all the way back to the start and see the opening moves. And we had d4 again. And like I said, this is our setup. If you remember the rules from the first video, knight to f6, and we always follow d4 with bishop to f4, this move. And one of the advantages of this setup is it just avoids learning so much theory that you might have to learn about individual openings black could play. If you play c4 on move 2, you have to learn the King's Indian, you have to learn the Benko, the Benoni, you have to learn the Budapest Gambit. You have to learn so much. But if you go bishop f4, you cut across so much of this. And now black played d5. So we're back into our first 3 videos on the London system. Well, here we create our pyramid, and that's exactly what Gatta did. e3, e6. Okay, he twisted the move order up a little bit here. There's nothing wrong with the move c3 here. But Gatta played knight d2. And this jumps forwards to our third rule, which is develop our minor pieces before creating our whole pyramid. But it really doesn't matter so much. c5, now back to rule 2. There is the pyramid. Knight c6, and now knight to f3. Remember, when e6 is played, we can always go knight to f3 as quickly as possible. Now, in the first video, we concentrated on bishop to e7, which I don't think is a great move because the bishop's doing nothing there. Now, 90% of top grandmaster games nowadays are continuing with the following move, bishop to d6. And this is really the move that is meant to be the best reply to the London system at the moment. But I still think white has great ways of gaining an advantage here, and we're going to talk about those ways in this game. And after bishop d6, what should you do? Well, the point is, if you take on d6, you're swapping off pieces. The more pieces you swap off, the harder it's going to be to get an advantage. You're giving your opponent an easy ride by exchanging pieces. So I don't want to do that. Knight to e5 was a move I wanted to play because this is quite similar to our philosophy. But the problem here is that the e5 square is not really stabilized enough. And black can attack this square with moves like queen c7. And eventually we're going to have to release control of this square, maybe with knight d7 coming later. And I don't want to do that. And I don't want to exchange off this knight. So that leaves one option, one further option, the Mexican standoff, bishop to g3. And this is the preferred move of all top grandmasters. And it's the move you should play. I call it the Mexican standoff because these two guys, they've got their guns out. They're ready to rock and roll. They're staring at each other. Who's going to shoot first? Is black going to take on g3 first? Is white going to take on d6 first? Whoever captures first loses something. For example, if black takes on g3, you just take with your h-pawn and look at this lovely file to attack along where the bishop comes to d3. This has got to be great. So here, the best move is castling. This is what Sam Shankland played. And now we've got to develop our final piece in the London system. This nearly always comes to d3, which points over at the black king. And now Samuel played the old main line in this position. In the next game, we're going to have a look at the new main line from black, which is b6, a superior move. I should also mention that Magnus Carlsen in this position has played bishop b5 a couple of times, but I don't see the need for this rather subtle move. I mean, us mere mortals can't always work up the subtleties of giants, so we should just stick to bishop d3. And now the old main line was queen e7, and this was fought about 10 years ago to equalize. But as Kamsky showed, there's been a lot of developments in this opening. Only now that the queen has moved to e7, should we go knight to e5. Because this has improved our position to when we did it before. For example, we don't have a bishop on f4 now. We have a bishop on g3. You might be thinking, so what? Well, if a move like queen c7, a typical move here would be f4. And we really get a lovely grip on that square, a move we couldn't play before because the pawn was blocked. But we can do that now. So this is now the right time to move in. Now, given a chance, we will simply castle, go f4, and start an attack on the king side, maybe with bishop h4 and the rook coming around to h3. This is a typical rook swing. Here, the old main line was knight d7, trying to fight for this e5 square. But now we're going to see this trick getting generated. Knight takes d7. And this starts a really dangerous sequence. Remember what we're going for from the start of the video. We're going for bishop takes h7 and this queen h5 idea. Now, Samuel Shanklin played bishop takes d7. It might be considered queen takes d7 to be a better move, but it still doesn't look very nice. And simply something like pawn takes c5 would be good here. After bishop takes c5, we can castle, and an important move to play next would be e4. We still have better development. Look at this dead bishop on c8. That bishop is not getting out of its grave for a long, long time. And I think most mortals here would take with a bishop on d7 after knight takes d7. And now we do this exchange. Bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. We need to get that queen to the c5 square. Can you remember how? Pause the video now if you don't remember the idea and you're just trying to get it back in your mind. Should be clear. Pawn takes c5. Here, queen takes c5. What is the trick? The Greek gift. Bishop takes h7 check. A devastating move. And we saw this at the start, so I'll go for the next couple of moves quickly. King takes, and they fly into the game. Knight to e4, the key move. Queen c4 is black's best square, because at least the queen remains active here. Knight g5. And really, this is incredibly hard now to stop all the threats here, because queen to h7, checkmate is the main threat. You may be thinking, well, black can play queen d3, but what is the way to stop that queen coming back to h7 now? There is a good blockading move now. Pause the video if you need to find a move. e4, a very good move, just blockading the queen's route back to h7. And Samuel decided he had to move the rook on f8 to give his king an escape square. So he went rook to d8, and from this square, the rook defends d7, so it might be best. Queen takes f7 check, why not? King h8, queen h5 check, why not? King g8, of course, there's a draw here, but why do we want to draw? An incredibly strong move from white now, rook d1. In actual fact, the problem is black is absolutely helpless here. White always has this annoying queen check and queen back idea. This rook maybe later on wants to come into the game, but it really just stops the queen coming to d3 and prepares a very nasty idea here. I mean, what can black do here? Given a chance, white will castle and go f4. This is a way to build up the attack. As we say, the rook swinger. It's really, really just horrible here for black. And the game finished. e5, trying to create counterplay. White went back with a check. And now pawn to e4, using a pin on the queen. Well, it really is just disgusting, this position. Black has to worry about this check all the time. Knight to e7 was tried, trying to bring the piece around to defend the king. But, okay, white simply took the knight. Bishop b5, threatening checkmate. So at least he's got a threat in. But now we see one of the advantages of having the rook here, can also defend. Rook d2. Queen takes a2. Going for counterplay, but this has all been worked out. Queen to f7. And the net is tightening around black's king. Check. The rook just comes back. Queen takes b2. And now we can see the king gets chased out of its layer. And it's forced over to the d file. And as soon as it hits the d file, we can bring our rook into the game with check. Again, that rook proving to be an invaluable piece. The king runs away, but eventually it's going to get tracked down. With knight e6 check going on, Samuel Shanklin decided to resign here. So what can we learn from this game? Well, again, the move order you have to be aware of, but we're really considering the move bishop d6 in this game when you should just retreat with bishop g3. You want black to take your bishop because then you open up the h-file, which will be very nice combined with a bishop coming to d3. If black does not capture, but simply castles, we finish our development. And now if he goes to the old main line with queen e7, now that our bishop has moved away, we can go knight to e5. If we're given a chance here, we're going to continue with f4, another good practical point behind bishop to g3. But generally the knight is very good there. And if we get a chance to do this Greek gift, we can take on d7. We can swap everything off and then go kaplonk. Kaplonk it on h7. with a lovely end to the game. So a very nice victory for Gatukanski there. We now come to my third game on the London system, or should we say our third example of how to play the London system. A great opening for us lazy players. And we're going to take one of the leading grandmasters of the London system, Gatakamsky again. And here is a game he defeated a fellow grandmaster in. And this game is just really important for current theory because a lot of black players are still playing the line we see here as black. Wesley So played it recently, other top players. So if you are at a really competitive level, this could be quite relevant to you. I have to admit, at club level, lower down, it might not be so relevant, but just to really cover all angles, I want to show you everything you need for this opening. And, well, hopefully from the first two videos you've got an idea about the basic setup and the kind of things you need to be doing and the stages of doing this, the 4-5 stages, some of the rules. And if you're not sure about that, go back to video 1 because I really covered that in video 1 as much as I think is needed. But we're going to go over it again here really briefly. So it started with d4, and this is the last video where we're going to be mainly concentrating on the move d5. We're going to move over to the other setups black has in the next videos. And just to mention here, the other things that black can play instead of d5 against d4, well, there's really the setups where black goes knight to f6 and then tries to go g6, so the kind of King's Indian kind of setups. There's setups where black can try to play e6, which is the kind of, should we say, Nimzo Indian setups. But one of the great things about the London system, think about this. I mean, if black goes knight to f6 and e6, which is the Nimzo Indian, very common opening, we can just do our same thing. It doesn't stop us from doing exactly what we want to do anyway, like bishop f4, knight to f3. The only thing that might be slightly different is if black plays a c5 move quickly. But again, we can just meet that with e3 or c3. So I'd really say black against our London system can either go d5, he can either go g6, so system 2 would be with g6, and the third types of systems is where black does something a little bit different. So maybe an early, very early c5 or some other weird moves we might encounter. But we'll cover all this later on. But in this video, we're concentrating on d5. So we play bishop to f4, stage 1. And now we go about getting our pyramid created, e3. I always like going e3 first because it just allows our bishop more oomph. And, you know, maybe in some rare lines we might want to play c4, but it doesn't make a big deal of difference. c5. And here I'd recommend c3 and knight to d2. But Kamsky played knight to f3. Now knight to c6. Now already I'm going to give you a little test here. And it's good to do this as we move on with our videos because you should watch them in sequential order, of course. What is the problem with the move c3? Now this is not the move you want to play in this position. Why would c3 be a slight error here, allowing black to equalize straight away? Why is that the case here with c3? Well, the problem with c3 is that black hasn't gone e6, so we don't really want to go knight to f3 just yet because of queen b6. And if you want to look at this in more detail, go back to video, the first video we did, we talked about it there. So we don't want to play this move order now. And Kamsky, for that reason, played knight on b to d2. And here, queen b6 is not so much of a worry, because I'm sure Kamsky was going to continue with pawn takes c5. But this is a bit out of our normal setup. And to avoid all this, the move order I would choose would be to simply go c3 in this position. And after knight c6, knight d2. But again, you've got to be subtle. You've got to understand all the intricacies and all the small details involved with this if you want to use it and really improve as a chess player. And I'll try my best to get them over to you. Okay, so knight to f3, but it comes to the same thing. Knight b d2. And now e6. So the standard move. And here c3, so we're back into what we know. And now, as I said before, bishop e7, in my eyes, is a mistake because of bishop d3, castles are then against bishop e7, knight to e5. And what is the key follow-up move here? Again, I'm testing you against most moves. Let's say a6. What is the key move to start an attack? h4. This is the key move with bishop to e7. But a better move than bishop to e7 is bishop to d6. So what you do here, you go for the Mexican standoff, bishop to g3, and now after castles, bishop to d3. And we've really now completed our basic, should we say, development here. And we've got to decide what we're going to do next. Now, the main move here is the move we're going to concentrate on now. This is the current theory at top level. We looked at Queen e7 in the last game, and this has disappeared from Grandmaster Chess because of how Kamsky dealt with Shankland in this move. The current theory is b6. And the idea of this move is for Black to develop his last piece to b7 and get more control over the central squares when the bishop gets there, but mainly the e4 square. And this was thought to equalize quite easily and give Black a simple game. But it's been proven now White has some good ways to make life difficult for Black here. What are those ways? Well, in the days of old, White used to play knight to e5 here. Now, as a rule, I'm only going to say go knight to e5 when Black has gone queen e7. I don't like this move here because of a very good maneuver that Black can play, and that is bishop b7. And this is something that in previous examples, Black has not been able to play after knight to e5, but he can play it here. And then if a move like f4 here, Black has a great way to re-maneuver his pieces. Knight to e7. And this is one reason I do not like this way of playing for White. But I want to show you this. I know it's quite high level, this, but you know it's worth looking at these middle game ideas. And why don't I like this for White? Because of Black's hold of the e4 square. This is an outpost, so you have to be careful that you don't lose control of this. Because you created this kind of pyramid with a little brother going on there on f4, you have to be careful of some of the squares you give away. Now, normally, this square is not an issue, but it is a bit of an issue here. And Black's idea is to just plonk a knight into that square and sit it there for the rest of the game. And I don't like this line. And this is why, after bishop d3, Black has started to play b6, because he's very happy facing that variation we just demonstrated. So what else can White play here? Now, I'm going to give you two options. I'm going to give you a simple option, and I'm going to give you a slightly more advanced option, which I think is better. Now, the simple option here is quite logical. Black has played b6. b6 has weakened the long diagonal for a second, only for a second. One more second later, it won't be weakened because the bishop will get to defend this potentially weak diagonal. But for a second, it's weak. So a key idea after the b6 move is e4. And this is a simple way of playing in this position. And the idea of this is Black has to be very careful what he exchanges. Because if he exchanges on d4, he will lose a piece. He will lose a piece to e5. So this is the main threat, of course. Now, if he doesn't take on d4, but takes on e4, well, now we have knight takes e4, and we're going to take advantage of this diagonal in a very uncomfortable way for Black. For example, the bishop is attacked, so knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and look how we take an advantage of this diagonal. Something like bishop b7, guarding that knight. And now there are quite a number of decent moves here. But in general, this bishop is very strong on this square. And simply pawn takes pawn would be good. Now, after this was played originally, there was a game Grishchuk versus Hikaru Nakamura, which went e4 in this position. Hikaru found what is considered a better way to play, but I quite like the position White gets here. And Hikaru played bishop to e7 here. And this allowed white to advance with pawn to e5, attacking that knight. And Hikaru's idea was to go knight h5. And these kind of positions I still like for white. It was Alekhine who said, when you got a pawn on e5, you should attack, attack, attack. Don't quote me if that was his direct quote, but you get the idea. You certainly have a great diagonal to attack along here. And this position, I think, is quite easy for white to play. So my simple solution against b6 is the immediate e4. But my more advanced solution is to prepare this e4 break in Carlsen fashion. And Magnus Carlsen has played the move queen e2 here first. And this is a very subtle move. You still want to play e4. And remember, e4 is only good when black plays b6. You're playing against the b6 move. You're preparing this move. And after something like bishop b7, rather than going e4 straight away, it was now a rook d1. This is very Carlsen-like, a very subtle move. And it may look crazy to put the rook here when there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces in the way of the rook. But it's amazing how open the position is going to become once you break with e4 and how well placed the rook will be here. And in my eyes, this gives white a very comfortable game. Now, what can black play against this move? Because we are going to try to play e4 pretty much whatever. Well, there's two main moves here. One main move is queen e7, connecting the rooks. And the other main move here is rook to e8, trying to prepare e5. So let's look at them one at a time. Well, in the main game, black played rook to e8. So we'll come back to one a bit later on. Queen to e7, preparing to move e5. I faced myself against some strong opposition. And now that we've got all our pieces in the right place, and it's worth noting yet again, we don't castle too quickly. Never be in a rush to castle really in the London system because it gives us more options. And again, that's the case here. Against queen e7, we must now push with e4. Why also is it quite urgent now for us to go e4? Well, it's quite urgent because black is now preparing to break e5. He wasn't going to play that last move. Let's have a look. If he plays it last move, he only has the bishop and the knight defending. e5. On the other hand, we have three pieces, bishop, knight and pawn, attacking that square. But as soon as he plays queen e7, he's preparing to get a lot of space in the center, so we must do something here. And now we must go e4 in this position. Now, we've used the crafty move order because unlike Hikaru Nakamura, the bishop cannot drop back to e7 now because there's a queen there. Black cannot take on d4 because we fork the pieces with e5. That's not good. So there's really only one option. Black has to take on e4. And we're going to slowly see how our rook becomes a great piece. We should play knight takes e4. And now the bishop is attacked. And remember, if black ever gives up on the Mexican standoff, we play h takes. And there's going to be some horrible threats against h7. Note here, yet again, why it's been good. We haven't castled here. This is another good reason why we haven't castled in this position. So here black should take on e4. The best move now is bishop takes e4. Our bishop is very well placed here, and this position gives us a nice small edge. For example, rook to d8 has been played, but now we take on c5, and after bishop takes c5, it's time to castle. And the problem here, it might look very even, but there's a big threat of b4 in this position. And there was one game which continued from a grandmaster playing h6 here. And now, well, b4 is okay straight away, but the move bishop c2 was much stronger because you're preparing this double whamming on that diagonal with queen d3. And black actually lost a piece here after taking on d1, playing rook d8, and now b4 simply won a piece. Bishop d6, queen d3, threatening a mate attack and threatening the bishop. And Grandmaster van der Dol had to resign in this position. So there's a lot of danger here. It's funny, but there's a lot of danger. So I quite like, after this b6, let's go back. I know it's quite in-depth, this, but that's what chess is. It's not an easy game, is it? It's not an easy game. And I'm trying to show you everything as much as I can here, all my knowledge. And let's just have a look at how I was going to say Kramnik. It's not Kramnik. He played like Kramnik, but it's Kamsky. He played rook d1, and the other move was rook e8. What do we do here? Of course, we play e4. And now the e7 square is still free, so bishop e7 is considered the best option. It should be noted that if e5 is played, we, of course, don't want to open too many lines on the e-file. So only in this case, because the rook is here, should we take on c5. And as long as we take on c5, our position is to be preferred because our rook is going to be more powerful against the opposing queen here. Check this yourselves if you want. But Kamsky's opponent played bishop e7. Now we played e5, knight to h5, and the move I'd recommend you'd play here, and one of the reasons we haven't castled, it's a novelty, I'm showing you a new secret idea, is h4. This is my secret idea. The idea of this move is to continue with knight g5 at some point, but mainly, let's say if c4, we have the Greek gift with bishop h7 check. And if you've seen the first two videos, you'll yet again see this idea coming into play here. King takes h7, knight g5 check, and this leads to a ginormous attack. This is my little idea. And again, there's only so much we can cover in this video. h4 is a novelty, and I do actually think it's good for you to look at this yourselves at home because, you know, I can show you everything here, but I want you to test out my ideas yourself. So go home and look at h4. And again, it shows you why it's not good to always castle so quickly here. Let's just have a look at a couple of moves from Kamsky. He played a3. This is also a good idea to go b4. Black now played c4. I consider this a mistake. It closes the position down. Bishop comes back to b1. There's also now a slow idea here of white playing knight to f1 and queen c2, going for the double ramming. Good attacking chances. Black tried to blunt out that diagonal, but now a lovely maneuver. And that is knight to f1. This knight is coming around to the g4 square, adding pressure to the king side. b5, knight to e3, a5, knight to g4. I mean, it looks like black is making fantastic progress after b4 on the queen side, but he's not really attacking anything on the queen side. On the other hand, we're going to checkmate black on the king side. And Kamsky doesn't even worry about his pawn on a3 here. He just goes queen e3. Bringing his queen into the squares, into the weakened squares. Very Fischer-like, this attack. B takes c3, B takes c3. And now, if bishop takes a3, there is a horrible check on h6 and some bishop h4 move. And again, this leads to a devastating attack with g4 coming up next. So rook b8 was played. And let's just see how the pressure increased. Bishop f4. Why bishop f4? Because white wants to go bishop g5 and swap off the dark square bishops because black's bishop on e7 is a main defender of his king. Bishop c8, bishop g5. Rook b3, and guess the move that white played now. Better late than never. h4. Increasing more pressure over here. Lovely maneuvering on that side of the ball. We're not even worried about our queen side here. Queen b6, bishop c2. And okay, we go a pawn down, but now we can attack. Bishop takes e7, and here comes the queen. Knight f6 check is coming next. Knight g5 may also be coming. And by swapping off those dark square bishops, black no longer has a move like bishop to f8, defending those squares. The end is nigh. Knight f5, well, of course, we get rid of that one now. And now knight g5, threatening queen takes h7 and queen takes f7, checkmate. So knight to f6 was the last little tricky move from black there. Quite a crafty move there. But after knight to e3, blocking the pin on the king, threatening the knight, also threatening knight takes d5. Well, f4 was played, but knight takes d5 came anyway. Queen d8. Can't take this knight. Worth pointing out, it's checkmate in two moves. Check, checkmate. So, well, black tried to play on a little bit with queen d8, but it didn't last long because white simply castled and black had to resign here. There's no way to eventually stop the checkmate on h7. And if black takes the knight, pawn takes f6 happens. Okay, now I know that video is a little bit more in depth than most videos I do, but like I said, I'm trying to go through all the basic points of this opening and go into a little bit of detail. Now, I also know my first video, I said, this is an opening for lazy people. You don't need to know that much. I still stick to that compared to most other openings. I mean, I think with my mini series here of 6-7 videos, you'll know everything you will need to know with a white opening. So it's really in an hour or 2 hours, you'll know everything. And you can't say that about any other opening. And of course, I'm doing this to quite a high level. And really, you don't need to know everything that I'm saying, but I'm trying to, give as much information as I can. But anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the video so far and they come in useful. And I'll be back with more in this series on the London system later on. Goodbye for now. We now come to my third game on the London system, or should we say our third example of how to play the London system. A great opening for us lazy players. And we're going to take one of the leading grandmasters of the London system, Gatakamsky again. And here is a game he defeated a fellow grandmaster in. And this game is just really important for current theory because a lot of black players are still playing the line we see here as black. Wesley So played it recently, other top players. So if you are at a really competitive level, this could be quite relevant to you. I have to admit, at club level, lower down, it might not be so relevant, but just to really cover all angles, I want to show you everything you need for this opening. And, well, hopefully from the first two videos you've got an idea about the basic setup and the kind of things you need to be doing and the stages of doing this, the 4-5 stages, some of the rules. And if you're not sure about that, go back to video 1 because I really covered that in video 1 as much as I think is needed. But we're going to go over it again here really briefly. So it started with d4, and this is the last video where we're going to be mainly concentrating on the move d5. We're going to move over to the other setups black has in the next videos. And just to mention here, the other things that black can play instead of d5 against d4, well, there's really the setups where black goes knight to f6 and then tries to go g6, so the kind of King's Indian kind of setups. There's setups where black can try to play e6, which is the kind of, should we say, Nimzo Indian setups. But one of the great things about the London system, think about this. I mean, if black goes knight to f6 and e6, which is the Nimzo Indian, very common opening, we can just do our same thing. It doesn't stop us from doing exactly what we want to do anyway, like bishop f4, knight to f3. The only thing that might be slightly different is if black plays a c5 move quickly. But again, we can just meet that with e3 or c3. So I'd really say black against our London system can either go d5, he can either go g6, so system 2 will be with g6, and the third types of systems is where black does something a little bit different. So maybe an early, very early c5 or some other weird moves we might encounter, but we'll cover all this later on. But in this video, we're concentrating on d5. So we play bishop to f4, stage 1. And now we go about getting our pyramid created, e3. I always like going e3 first because it just allows our bishop more oomph. And, you know, maybe in some rare lines we might want to play c4, but it doesn't make a big deal of difference. c5. And here I'd recommend c3 and knight to d2. But Kamsky played knight to f3. Now knight to c6. Now already I'm going to give you a little test here. And it's good to do this as we move on with our videos because you should watch them in sequential order, of course. What is the problem with the move c3? Now this is not the move you want to play in this position. Why would c3 be a slight error here, allowing black to equalize straight away? Why is that the case here with c3? Well, the problem with c3 is that black hasn't gone e6, so we don't really want to go knight to f3 just yet because of queen b6. And if you want to look at this in more detail, go back to video, you know, the first video we did, we talked about it there. So we don't want to play this move order now. And Kamsky, for that reason, played knight on b to d2. And here, queen b6 is not so much of a worry, because I'm sure Kamsky was going to continue with pawn takes c5. But this is a bit out of our normal setup. And to avoid all this, the move order I would choose would be to simply go c3 in this position. And after knight c6, knight d2. But again, you've got to be subtle. You've got to understand all the intricacies and all the small details involved with this if you want to use it and really improve as a chess player. And I'll try my best to get them over to you. Okay, so knight to f3, but it comes to the same thing. Knight b d2. And now e6. So the standard move. And here c3. So we're back into what we know. And now, as I said before, bishop e7 in my eyes is a mistake because of bishop d3. Castles are then against bishop e7. Knight to e5. And what is the key follow-up move here? Again, I'm testing you against most moves. Let's say a6. What is the key move to start an attack? h4. This is the key move with bishop to e7. But a better move than bishop to e7 is bishop to d6. So what you do here, you go for the Mexican standoff, bishop to g3. And now after castles, bishop to d3. And we've really now completed our basic, should we say, development here. And we've got to decide what we're going to do next. Now, the main move here is the move we're going to concentrate on now. This is the current theory at top level. We looked at queen e7 in the last game, and this has disappeared from Grandmaster Chess because of how Kamsky dealt with Shankland in this move. The current theory is b6. And the idea of this move is for black to develop his last piece to b7 and get more control over the central squares when the bishop gets there, but mainly the e4 square. And this was thought to equalize quite easily and give black a simple game. But it's been proven now white has some good ways to make life difficult for black here. What are those ways? Well, in the days of old, white used to play knight to e5 here. Now, as a rule, I'm only going to say go knight to e5 when black has gone queen e7. I don't like this move here because of a very good maneuver that black can play, and that is bishop b7. And this is something that in previous examples, black has not been able to play after knight to e5, but he can play it here. And then if a move like f4 here, black has a great way to re-maneuver his pieces. Knight to e7. And this is one reason I do not like this way of playing for white. But I want to show this. I know it's quite high level, this, but you know it's worth looking at these middle game ideas. And why don't I like this for white? Because of black's hold of the e4 square. This is an outpost, so you have to be careful that you don't lose control of this. Because you created this kind of pyramid with a little brother going on there on f4, you have to be careful of some of the squares you give away.